James Harden will be out for at least the next 10 days for the Brooklyn Nets with a hamstring strain. Ironically, the exact same injury Kevin Durant suffered from keeping him out the last 23 games. For him, he didn't start tonight, but actually has gotten some minutes in tonight's game going on right now. The Nets' big three has been basically hypothetical this season. They've only played 7 games together since James Harden came over from Houston in January 14th, and I'm reading that, and that sounds like a tremendous season a long time ago. It felt like it happened yesterday. Anyways, Mike, do the Nets need all three, KD, Kyrie, and Harden, of course, to win an NBA championship, or can they find a way to do it without either one or two of them even?
I think 2 might be tough if 2 guys are down, but what I've noticed with the super teams is as you add more players, you become normalized to the amount of stars they have in the team. I mean, before the Nets were the favorites in the East with KD and Kyrie, and now when Harden's added to there, they're the favorites to win the championships, obviously. But just because one guy isn't there, you still got 2 All-Stars. I don't think you get worried. I think that even with Harden out and maybe one of like the preliminary All-Stars like Aldridge and Blake Griffin, if those guys are out too, because they're older and they might have health risks come postseason time, I still don't think you're worried. I mean, even if you have KD, Kyrie, or any combination of the 3 guys there, I don't think it's a worry at all. I mean, I don't see a team on the East that can challenge them. I mean, looking at the standings, they're second in the East, 35-16. They're really tied with Philadelphia. Philadelphia's in first, but tiebreaker puts Philly ahead of them. I just don't see, even with 2 of those stars, a team in the East that can beat them. And you mentioned all the injuries and how a few times they played all together, and they're still that high of a record. I mean, it's impressive to me, and I think they're going to walk through this East.
I'm going to disagree with you. I don't disagree with you that they're going to win the East, and I think the regular season doesn't worry me very much, if at all, because they've played this whole time, like I mentioned, without all 3 of them. And they've obviously done very well sitting atop the East, or at least tied for it right now. And that's not really a worry. It would be nice to get that number 1 spot for home court advantage throughout the Eastern Conference playoffs. I think that's important. But even that, I think they can find a way to get that pretty easily with 2 out of the 3, whoever that may be. For the Nets there, I think it's a slightly weak Eastern Conference, and they can certainly work their way through it. They're the most talented team in the conference, and they're probably the best team in the conference, even just 2 of them out of the big 3 there. So I don't worry about that, but I do worry about playoff time, if I'm going to be totally honest. I worry about, especially hamstrings. I feel like hamstring injuries are one of those injuries that are reoccurring. If you talk to athletes, I feel like hamstrings tend to happen over and over and over again, unfortunately. And that's something that's definitely worrisome for both Harden and KD coming back from that same injury. Come playoff time, I think all 3 of these guys need to be healthy in order to assure that, okay, I'm not worried as a Nets fan, or I'm not worried that this team is going to make a run here and end with a championship. But for me, I think there's always, whenever there's injury involved, I guess for me, maybe it's just me, but I'm a little pessimistic just because of the potential of, let's say Harden or a KD goes down in the playoffs, God forbid, but it puts the Nets in a really difficult situation, I'd say. I think the Eastern Conference is within due, and it's certainly possible to work your way through that conference. But, come championship time and you got to play a Lakers team, well, hopefully a Lakers team, if they're healthy. Obviously, LeBron and AD, that's another question mark there. And now that I bring that up, that's a reason why I'm a little bit, I guess, more optimistic with the Nets than I would normally be, just because LeBron and AD, I don't think they even have a timetable yet to return either of them. So that's a worrisome thing for the Lakers. The Lakers, if I'm a Lakers fan, I'm seriously worried about that for sure. But that, I guess you could say, helps the Nets a little bit. I hate to say that with an injury, but it does, because that Lakers team seems to be the biggest challenge for them, come NBA Finals time, or even come playoff time in general. So, but my point is, I guess, is that come playoff time, these guys have to be fully healthy and have to be at least a week or 2 under their belt playing together, which I assume they will have that amount of time. But to me, it's about staying healthy throughout the playoffs for this next team to really thrive and I'd say reach the NBA Finals, which I think is just about the goal of this season. At least reach the NBA Finals, if not more, depending obviously on the Western Conference, depending on the Lakers and their health, depending on the Jazz and some other teams out there as well.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those points. I mean, you definitely feel like this is a season you got to capitalize on. For that reason, you're a little worried. But I mean, I'm looking at these other teams and the Lakers, like you said, there's a lot of up in the air. I mean, they're hoping Anthony Davis comes back to face the Celtics April 15th. They were talking he might return when they after the road trip. That's a possibility. There's obviously no rush to bring him back. You don't want to bring him back and then risk another injury. But LeBron, there's been no timetable, so you're worried about that if you're a Laker fan. So for those reasons, the Nets probably a little more relaxed. And out of the East, I don't see any real threats. I mean, Philadelphia kind of scares me because Embiid's having such a great season. I think Ben Simmons has improved. He might be the best defender in the league. I mean, he's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but if you talk about a backcourt defender, there's not many better than him. And I think that the Bucks are good with Giannis, but they've yet to prove anything to me in the playoffs that would matter. I would still take KD, Harden, and Kyrie over them. And I think outside of those two teams, there aren't really any threats to me in the East. And then if you go over to the West, I think a lot is to be determined there. And whoever the Nets happen to face in the championship, that's already, I think, a success of a season if you made it that far. So in looking at it that way, I'm not worried about the Nets. Even if Harden's down, I think even if Kyrie's down, I think KD's good enough to maybe bring these teams to the Eastern Conference Finals.
I think it's funny because if you looked at it when this trade initially occurred, at least for me, for James Harden in the beginning of January, the middle of January, I would have, if I had heard, oh, they only played 7 games together, the big three, I would definitely think the Nets would be in a lot worse position than they would be in right now, because I felt like they were a very good team beforehand, but when they got this big three together, I still had some doubts just because I guess, defensively, they aren't a very good defensive team, and come playoff time that could present some issues. But if you told me that they would only play 7 games together now and they're sitting atop the Eastern Conference, I don't know if I would 100% believe you, but I just find that pretty impressive with how good this Nets team really is. The fact that they've done it for the most part with 1 or 2 guys. Harden has stepped up huge. You got to give him a ton of credit for what he's done in Brooklyn. And Kyrie coming back has helped a lot too. And now with Kevin Durant back, one of the best players on the planet right now, that is awesome. That is a huge thing, a huge piece to have back for this Nets team as they move forward into the playoffs.